This conference will now be recorded.
So good afternoon, everyone. We'll discuss about poliomyelitis. So under these headings, introduction, etiopathogenesis, clinical spectrum, differential diagnosis, orthopedic complications, management, and conclusion. Poliomyelitis is an acute infectious viral disease spread by the oropharyngeal route. It is a major cause of morbidity and mortality until the 1960s. Large epidemics in 1940s and 1950s were present in the developed world. Only 10% of patients exhibit symptoms, and out of them, only less than 1% have CNS involvement. Silent circulation. So many may be infected prior to the development of single case of paralysis. Now that polio has been said to be eradicated, we find very less cases, and all the cases that we see right now are probably the sequelae of old infections. So according to WHO, a single confirmed case of polio in an area of low occurrence is an epidemic. What happens in polio is anti-horn cells are affected in the spinal cord and brainstem. So it is called bulbar polio or spinal polio. The anti-horn cells, which are motor uh, in function, they are affected, and flaccid paralysis of the affected muscle groups. So you can have involvement of some of the motor units or all motor units. So due to vaccination and effects of previous disease are still with us, and it has now become a rare disease because of its vaccination. So it affects children less than 5 years of age. Male is to female is 3:1. Maternal immunity disappears during the first 6 months of life, and immunity after infection is lifelong, but re-injection uh, reinfection can occur. No cross immunities in types 1, 2, and 3. So that's why you have to give 3 strains of OPV in one vial. So you have to, there is no cross immunity, even if there is infection of one type, the body is not immune to the other strains. So in 2014, the status is Pakistan, Nigeria, and Afghanistan are endemic, and Nigeria out of polio in the endemic list by 2015. So all cases could be controlled, or spread could be controlled by effective vaccination strategies. So patients with post-polio sequelae are very abundant, and they are not infectious. If you come in contact with a polio patient who has a paralysis, he will not infect you because it is not acute. It is a chronic case, and they are crippled and outcast in the modern society. So the role of orthopedic surgeon is not only during the acute phase, but also effectively treat sequelae to lead a normal life. So infection is caused by enterovirus, which is a picornavirus family, single-stranded RNA, 3 different strains of virus, type 1, 2, and 3. There is no cross immunity, as we said. Poliovirus can survive for long periods in external environment. 4 months it can stay in water, and 6 months in feces. Fecal-oral contamination will lead to spread and also herd immunity. Polio is more likely during the rainy season, overcrowding and poor sanitation. What source of infection are contaminated water, flood, food, and flies. Oral route multiplies in the intestine. The virus reaches the nervous system via bloodstream. Incubation is 7 to 14 days. It shows affinity to brainstem and spinal cord, brainstem nuclei, and anti-horn cells of the spinal cord. So what does it cause? It causes flaccid paralysis. So the CNS sends signals to the spinal cord and the motor unit via the antihorn cell, which is the motor neuron. So the proportion of motor units destroyed is variable, and the resultant weakness depends on the percentage of motor units that have been destroyed. So in the spinal cord, you have a motor anterior column, which is motor. So if more number of motor units are damaged or more number of anterior horn cells are damaged, the corresponding motor units are damaged, and the muscle doesn't get signal to contract. So then the muscle goes into a disuse atrophy. So that is what happens. So antihorn cell, the virus stays here and destroys this antihorn cell. So you have a loss of connection to the motor unit, corresponding motor unit, and then you have less stimulation of the muscle. So as it occurs in children, so with age, the muscle doesn't contract and blood supply to the bone is also less because of lack of contraction of muscle. So the bone is smaller than the other normal limb and muscles are wasted. So the polio passes through various phases: acute illness, paralysis, convalescence, and residual paralysis. Prodromal symptoms: like any viral infection, patient can have sore throat, mild headache, slight pyrexia, and diarrhea. With increase in severity, neck stiffness like meningitis, joints are flexed and muscles are painful and tender, and passive stretching provokes painful spasms. So patient with a sore throat and fever, pain on passive stretch, we see very few cases, but previously there used to be many and they used to detect. So muscle weakness appears in around 2 to 3 days, which give rise to dyspnea and dysphagia, because in bulbar polio, the muscles of deglutition are supplied by the CNS nerves. So if there is more dyspnea and respiratory paralysis, probably the patient will die. So if the patient doesn't succumb, pain and pyrexia subside after 7 to 10 days. Patient is infective for at least 4 weeks. So he might be a carrier for about 4 weeks. So of children who become paralyzed by polio, 30% recover completely in the first weeks or months. And out of 100, 30 may have mild paralysis, 30 have moderate or severe paralysis, which requires walking aids and wheelchairs, and 10% die because of difficulty in breathing or swallowing, that is respiratory paralysis. Return of muscle power most noticeable within first 6 months, and there may be continuing improvement for up to 2 years. The effect, the neuronal damage is not reversed, but you can expect some recovery in the muscle power, but not as a pre-injury status or a pre-infectious status. So incomplete recovery can lead to asymmetric flaccid paralysis, like a lower motor neuron lesion, or unbalanced muscle weakness, because one set of muscles you can have paralysis, one set of muscles will act. So that will lead to joint deformities and growth defects. The sensation is intact, only the motor is lost, and voluntary action of the limbs is not possible, according to which nerve is affected. So you can see residual paralysis, the limbs are small and their growth is restricted, and muscles are, and they are flaccid and they cannot move, and they lead to fixed deformities because in one position they are kept and they are not moving, so the joint contractures are inevitable. In clinical spectrum, post-polio syndrome, reactivation of virus, 50% of cases, progressive muscle weakness, unaccustomed fatigue can occur. How do we diagnose? With confirmed history of poliomyelitis and period of neurological stability of at least disability of about 15 years. And diagnosis of exclusion. So you rule out all other causes, probably that is the case of polio. So diagnosis is usually done in endemic areas with child presents with acute flaccid paralysis. So an episode of fever and then a paralysis, probably it is polio. Other differential diagnoses to think of are Guillain-Barré syndrome, acute transverse myelitis, traumatic paraplegia, myopathy, neuropathy, and spinal dysraphism. In Guillain-Barré syndrome, ascending symmetrical myelopathy occurs later in life. Facial nerve palsy can be seen, and most have complete recovery. So it is symmetric. Guillain-Barré syndrome is symmetric, and facial nerve palsy can be seen. In acute transverse myelitis, the sensory and motor paralysis is below a particular level to which vascular supply to the spinal cord has been interrupted. Sometimes it is due to a vasculitis kind of a picture in the spinal cord. The MRI is normal, and the patient will have a paralysis below the lesion, that like a lower motor type of paralysis. In traumatic paraplegia, history of trauma and radiograph may show the fracture. You can have a vertebral fracture compromising the spinal canal and causing pressure over the spinal cord can lead to a paraplegia. So that also can present late, and you may consider as a differential diagnosis. In neuropathy, both motor and sensory loss, generally bilateral, treating the cause may lead to improvement. And myopathy, lower motor neuron paralysis with no sensory loss, mostly genetic, and the pattern is predictable. So here the nerve, spinal cord and nerve supply are good, but the muscles are at fault. So paralysis tends to worsen over time, and muscle biopsy is the diagnosis. Spinal dysraphism is like meningocele, meningomyelocele, Arnold-Chiari malformation. So tuft of hair or swelling at the back in the lower spine, and there may be both motor and sensory loss and paralysis that may deteriorate the growth. So if there is spinal cord involvement, it is usually both motor and sensory. In polio, it is purely a motor. What are the orthopedic complications? You can have complications of the paralysis in the lower limb, trunk, both upper and lower limbs, bilateral upper limbs, and trunk and lower limbs and upper limbs. Very rarely you have both upper limbs and lower limbs. Most of the time it is usually a single one-sided lower limb. So some muscles have short columns of cells in the spinal cord, while some have long columns. The short column muscles have developed complete paralysis. So most commonly paralyzed muscle are quadriceps femoris, okay, so which is completely paralyzed, and patient presents to your OPD or clinic with a hand to knee gait. So the patient pushes his thigh backward with the help of his hand to help in extension, because the extension is lost because of paralysis of quadriceps femoris. Quadriceps femoris is the extensor of the knee. So if that is lost, so to compensate, the patient comes with hand to knee gait and he pushes the thigh backward to extend the knee joint. In the upper limb, most commonly involved muscle is deltoid. Hand muscles are rarely involved. Most common is opponent's pollicis. So proximal muscles, shoulder muscles, muscles behind the arm, that is the triceps. So the straightening of arm, the loss of contour of the arm. Thumb muscles, so you can have wasting there. So muscles at the hip, so adductors and gluteus maximus can be involved, and quadriceps is most common, and contractures leading to flexion deformity of knee and plantar flexion deformity in the ankle. So that is the equinus deformity in the ankle. So tibialis anterior paralysis will cause a foot drop like picture, and you have equinus. In lower limb, you have ITB contracture, which is iliotibial band. Okay, so the tensor fascial lata continues downwards as an iliotibial band, and you can have contractures of hip, flexion, abduction, and external rotation, knee flexion and valgus. This is a triple deformity known as flexion, posterior subluxation, and external rotation deformity, which is also common in tuberculosis, is also common in polio. So other deformities, as we already told you, equinus deformity of ankle, flexion of the knee, callus on the knee from crawling. So these are typical contractures. And valgus deformity and external rotation deformity of the knee. So we have overstretched joints, and this scoliosis also to compensate the deformities of the hip and knee. Dislocations or subluxations can be seen in the knee and foot. So all this is due to muscle imbalance. One group of muscles are active, one group of muscles are inactive. So you can have scoliosis. A side to side bend is called lateral bending, and anterior posterior bending is kyphosis and lordosis. So you have rotation as well as lateral bending in scoliosis. So why there is progressive deformity? It is due to muscle imbalance. As I told you, one group, if flexor muscles are more active and extensors are paralyzed, that leads to flexion deformities. Unrelieved muscle spasm also pulls the same compartment. Muscles are in spasm, it pulls in that direction. And growth, because there is, to start with, there is a deformity, and growth also aggravates the deformity. Gravity and posture. Patient lies on the bed supine and knee flexed, so you get more of a flexion contracture. And bony deformities also occur due to lack of blood supply and lack of muscle innervation. So how do you prevent? You all know about the oral polio vaccine and the inactivated Salk IM injection, which is injectable polio vaccine. And if a patient has an attack of polio, he should be immunized, as there are 3 strains of the virus and there is no cross immunity. So oral polio vaccine is preventive, and management, it depends on phase of the diagnosis. In acute phase, symptomatic treatment is sufficient. Bed rest and splintage of paralyzed limbs. Active movements are avoided. In the early stages, patient will have pain on passive stretch. Then you should not advise the patient to move the limbs. They need complete rest. And once they get recovered from acute phase, then physiotherapy can be given. And for respiratory paralysis, they need ventilatory support. In convalescent phase, joints are splinted to reduce pain. Joint mobilization exercises are begun. And paralysis, you have to limit the resultant deformities. So you don't want a contracture. So adjacent joints should be mobilized later. Post-polio residual paralysis should be treated by correcting the deformities to provide maximum attainable function. So if the patient is not able to stand, so you should give some calipers and make the patient stand. If the patient is able to stand but not able to walk, then you have to give some crutches or flexed braces so that the patient can walk. So you have to improve their function. Splints and traction can be given to improve the patient's function. Operative treatment, so patients can have a equinus and the deformities of the joint, which can be corrected through Ilizarov surgery and for soft tissue release, tendon transfers, osteotomies, arthrodesis, and arthroplasty. Arthroplasty is usually not done because of muscle imbalance. If you do a total knee replacement or a total hip replacement, so we should never do a total knee or a total hip in a polio patient because it leads to more dislocations. So it is not advisable. So if the patient is, even if they are affordable and they have a problem, it is better advised not to go for a total hip or a total knee replacement in a polio patient. Prognosis depends on two factors, where the severity of initial paralysis and diffuseness of its regional distribution. So generally, if total paralysis persists beyond second month, significant recovery is unlikely. If the initial paralysis is partial, prognosis is better. The more extensive the paralysis, the first 10 days of illness, the more severe the ultimate disability. So more motor units are used up, so that will cause more disability. So this is also history. It was first described in 1700s and first epidemic in the late 1800s. So polio is gray matter. In Greek, polio means gray, mylos means medulla. Polio, myelitis. So polio, gray matter, and myelitis, inflammation of spinal cord. So it is an enterovirus. We have already discussed. Type 1 is most common. It is the weakest strain and causes 1% neuroparalysis. So it is transmitted through fecal-oral route, destroys the anterior horn cells in the spinal cord, multiplies in the muscles to manifest weakness and flaccid paralysis. So usually child of age 9 months to 5 years are common. So the main key features here are asymmetrical and asymmetrical paralysis with varying severity. We have spinal polio, which involves spinal cord, bulbar polio, which involves the brainstem. Spinal cord polio is common. So as we told you, it affects the anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. Bulbar polio is up to 2% of cases of paralytic polio. It invades and destroys the nerves within the bulbar region of the brainstem. Nerves weaken the muscles supplied by the cranial nerves, producing symptoms of encephalitis. So most of them are asymptomatic. Some have abortive polio, non-paralytic polio, and paralytic poliomyelitis. So we have also discussed about acute stage, convalescent stage, and chronic stage. The most common, most severely paralyzed muscle is the tibialis anterior, which causes dorsiflexion of the ankle. So that is gone. So it leads to a foot drop kind of a foot drop like a deformity, and then it leads to contracture. So you should know difference between attitude and deformity. Attitude is the position at ease, and deformity is not correctable. So if there is a equinus deformity, you can't correct it to either neutral, and you can't have the opposite range of motion. If there is a fixed deformity in flexion, so the patient can't do an extension. So that is the difference between attitude and deformity. Cause of deformity, we've already discussed: muscle imbalance, posture and gravity, dynamics of activity, and dynamics of growth. So lab diagnosis is antibodies against IgM. So these are the foot and ankle arthrosis. So that for Clottos, that is the arthrosis. This is a foot drop splint. So tibialis anterior is paralyzed. So the foot slaps on the ground with every step. So to prevent that, this is the ankle foot orthosis. Orthosis is a device that supports the limb to aid in function. That is your ankle foot arthrosis. For equinovarus, like CTEV, we can give them shoes in children. So coming to surgeries that are done in polio, we have to address the muscle imbalance. So we have to balance the power and we have to stabilize the joint and correct the deformities. And if there is shortening, we have to do a limb lengthening procedure. Tendon transfers are indicated when dynamic muscle imbalance results in deformity, and surgery should be delayed until maximum function returns. In the tendon transfer, usually the power of the tendon that you are transferring decreases by 1 when you transfer it. So if you have a 5x5 tendon that you are transferring to a weakened muscle, then the power of the donor muscle decrease by 1. So it will become 4. So muscle to be transferred should be a strong muscle, and free end of transfer tendon should be attached to close to the possible insertion of the paralyzed tendon. And nerve supply and blood supply must not be impaired, and agonists are preferred to than antagonist muscle. So if all the groups of muscles are involved, the opposite group of muscles should be rerouted to do a tendon transfer. Arthrodesis is the most efficient treatment to stabilize the joint, but the patient will lose movements. Post-polio residual paralysis of foot and ankle, as we have told you, we use splints to aid in function. So there is extensor insufficiency in the ankle. So we'll go through the procedures. Clotto is the flexion of the flexion of the interphalangeal joint and hyperextension of the metatarsophalangeal joint. So dorsiflexors of the great toe are paralyzed. So there is overactivity of the flexor muscles that leads to clotto. So what they do, they reroute the flexor hallucis longus tendon, which is plantar, and they reinsert it onto the metatarsophalangeal joint capsule. So that will correct the deformity of the clotto. Here you can see equinus foot is plantar flexion, equinovarus deformity like your CTEV. This is an equinovalgus deformity. So repeated stretching and tendon Achilles lengthening can be done, and tendon transfer should be done from the opposite group of muscles. Gastrosoleus or the tendoachilles contracture can also occur. So rerouting procedures like opposite group of muscles can be rerouted to stabilize the joint. Function is not restored completely, but a plantigrade foot can be achieved. So I hope you understood. It's a little difficult topic for undergraduates. So only the points which you are require in the management, I have explained those. And your most important thing that you have to remember is it is a viral infection, and post-polio residual paralysis requires treatment for optimal function. And you can summarize the management like medical management for only acute phase, convalescent phase, and for post-polio residual paralysis, you have to correct the muscle imbalance and stabilize the joints, and if required, you have to do a joint fusion. And for gaining function of the paralyzed muscles, you need to do a tendon transfer and then rehabilitation. So whatever surgery is done, if it is not rehabilitated well, there will be again loss of function. They have to be counseled well and they have to reevaluate. We should also respect the patients because of their disability. You have to boost their morale, and we should not look down upon on the disabled patients. And many people, there are many examples of people with disability. They achieve more than normal people. So they require the dignity that we give to a normal person. So treat them like a normal individual, and to give a better treatment, we should know more, we should learn more to give a good quality treatment and rehabilitation to patients of post-polio or residual paralysis. And in some countries, oral polio also is banned because sometimes there is a risk of very rarely the patients can develop polio due to vaccination because of the strains in the oral polio vaccine. So if some batches like last year happened, some batches of vaccine had a activated polio vaccine which led to paralysis after vaccination. So the best safest thing is injectable polio. And one more important point is you should never give an IM injection when the child has fever. That is very, very important. So injection can lead to decreased immunity and a precipitation of paralysis can occur, especially polio. So you don't know whether the child has polio due to normal fever. So we should avoid, up to 10 years of age, you should avoid IM injection in a febrile child. So our pediatrics professor used to say that we should write on the top of our textbooks this sentence, that a febrile child should not be given IM injection. So I'm repeating again, a febrile child or a child with fever should not be given IM injection. So I hope you understood. Any feedback you want to give to improve the classes, you're most welcome. And any doubts, you are free to contact the department. Our faculty will help you. Hope you understood this. Thank you.